May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each heart be holy and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. There's been talk of kings lately. I don't know if you've noticed. Lots of talk about kings and monarchy with the recent coronation of King Charles. And there is this kind of American fascination with all of this. And you'll find plenty of Anglophiles within the Episcopal Church. My personal Anglophilia extends only to British murder mysteries, Monty Python, and the British music invasion, which for some odd reason reintroduced America's youth to the Mississippi Delta blues. But that's about as far as it goes for me. I don't know if it's because of my affinity for Irish republicanism or the band The Pogues or a combination of the two, but I don't really get monarchy. But I do recognize there's a history there. And there are interesting stories. There are stories to learn. For instance, a film I enjoyed several years ago, and I'm sure many of you, if not most of you, saw it, was The King's Speech. The story of King George VI, played by Colin Firth, who in preparing to ascend to the throne is accompanied by riddling self-doubt and insecurities because of a lifelong speech impediment, which leads him to seek the help of the unorthodox, non-medically trained speech therapist Lionel Logue, brilliantly played by Jeffrey Rush. And I'm not going to unpack the whole plot, but the film takes a deep dive into the nature of healing and human agency and authentic relationships. And there's this climactic scene set in Westminster Abbey where the beleaguered future king will be crowned through the guise of confronting Lionel's lack of medical training. The soon-to-be king is actually confronting his own fears, his own insecurities, to which the therapist responds with irreverence and a line of questioning until the scene intensifies with this crucial dialogue. "Listen to me," the king cries. "Why should I listen to you? Because I am your king. It's my divine right. So what? You don't even want to be king. You said that yourself. I have a right to be heard. Who says?" And then King George VI screams without stammer or impediment, "Because I have a voice." His words echoing off the walls of stone, lingering there in the air until Lionel looks him in the face and says, "Yes, you do." They were all together there in one place. That's what it says in Acts chapter 2. Not just devout Jews, but Parthians and Medes and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, probably a tire salesman from Akron, Ohio, a single mom from Omaha, East Coast hedge fund managers in press suits, and West Coast software engineers in flip-flops. They were all there. They were all watching what was happening. They were all moved by this movement of the Spirit of God, and some were amazed. Some were amazed, but some, they laughed. They mocked. They rolled their eyes. They sneered. That's what the text says. They sneered. What a great word. Tough crowd. Sounds like many of them had already made up their minds about what was going on. But look what Peter does. He doesn't raise his hand. He doesn't raise concerns with the other 11 disciples. He doesn't raise questions. What does Peter do? He raises his voice. He raises his voice. Peter, you see, he had a speech impediment too, He found it hard to talk because his foot was always in his mouth. Perhaps you know people like that. Peter the impetuous. Peter the stubborn. Peter the denier. Peter, y'all remember Peter, that very Peter stood among the 11 and raised his voice. The first sermon of the church. It wasn't an Easter Sunday sermon to a crowd of the well-dressed faithful. It was to people who thought them so foolish, thought them so ridiculous, the only possible reason is maybe they were just drunk. Peter raised his voice to that crowd. And Peter said, "We were told ever since we were children, remember? Don't you remember the old rabbis read us the passages in the synagogue? Remember the prophet Joel? God is going to pour out God's Spirit on everyone, young, old, men, women, slave, free, on everyone." And we don't have it in our reading here, but he'll go on to preach about Jesus, and Peter says something quite astounding. He says to the crowd, "Jesus, you knew his life, you knew his death, you knew his resurrection. Of that, we are witnesses." Did you hear? Jesus' life and death, everyone knows. Public record. His resurrection, we are witnesses. You see, Peter put into motion the preaching, the proclamation of the early church, which was to give witness to the resurrection. And we hear that phrase, give witness to the resurrection, and we already anticipate the sneering, right? Resurrection. Resurrection again, really, with this? Please, what proof do you have? What facts and figures can you muster up? But for Luke, the author of Acts, and for the first preachers in the church, it is the Spirit of God giving courage to speak to a public when public approval doesn't exist. It's to give the nonsensical, perhaps even misunderstood word of this: Jesus, you know his death, you know his resurrection, we are witnesses. Proof? You want proof? Go to the Senate floors of Rome if you want proof. Facts and figures? You want facts and figures? Go to the counting houses of the tax collectors and to the temple treasury if you want facts and figures. We're not talking about proof. Belief comes at the end of proof. We're talking about faith. It takes faith to believe the way Jesus did. It takes faith to love the way Jesus loved. It takes faith to heal the way he healed us. It takes faith to eat with the people he ate with, say the things he said, do the things he did. That's who we're trying to be. Proof, facts, figures? Please, the early church said, please. We're talking about a new world here. We're talking about being new people. This is a new life. See, that's the preaching of the church. Not that I don't wish I had some proof. I sure do. It would be really helpful. Standing here every Sunday wearing this weird, uncomfortable robe saying, Christ is risen, Christ is risen. Especially in a world such as ours, in a life as hard as the one we are all born into. No wonder we try to recruit all the other voices. No wonder we say things like, well, let's get science to weigh in. Let's get the historians. Let's see what they have to say, see if they can prove our points. Let's get all the religious scholars on board. Of course we do. Of course we try to do that because it's scary. You feel foolish. Sometimes you meet people and they've known nothing but heartache and loss their whole lives. There are people like that. Life for them has been nothing but a cup of ashes, and we're supposed to talk about the resurrection and hold before them the cup of salvation and say, here? It's safer not to say anything at all. Of course we're scared. Of course we are. That's why we need courage. Far from the madding crowd was Thomas Hardy's fourth novel with a character named Farmer Oak. Farmer Oak, poor, pathetic Farmer Oak, stood at the window every morning and evening, watched a young woman, a beautiful young woman, pass by his window to go milk the cows or tend to the sheep every day, every night. He watched her looking from behind the safety of his window. He had been held to her, Hardy writes. He had been held to her by a beautiful thread which it pained him to spoil by breaking. He watched, and in watching he fell in love. But she never knew. She never knew because he never had the courage to speak. How many times I have been Farmer Oak. I'm sure you have too. Watching from behind the windows of our eyes, never finding the courage to raise our voice, held to the world by a thread it pained us to spoil by breaking. If we spoke. And the truth of the matter is the thread could break. Or maybe the truth of the matter is the thread needs to break. Because this life is full of people hanging on by a thread who need to be held by the love of God. It takes courage to speak. It takes courage to say, you know of Jesus' death, but I am a witness to his resurrection. It takes courage to speak. Everything might feel like death to you right now, but I know life. And there is one who has life to the fullest. It takes courage to speak in those moments. It takes courage because we must trust the stirring inside us that tells us we have a voice. Because I have a voice, it echoes off the stone walls of our hearts that are becoming flesh. Because I have a voice. And the Spirit of God says, yes, you do. Amen.